Contribution. All right, let's get on with it. There's the tie up there. Let's get on with it. Our featured presenter tonight is Dr. Bob Browning, an alumni of UNCW. He's got his PhD from University of Alabama. There you go, that's right. Served as Park Superintendent for the battleship Texas. Emeritus Chief Historian for the United States Coast Guard, retired in 2015. Author of 6 books and dozens of scholarly articles on the Coast Guard, American Civil War, and U.S. naval and maritime history. His wife Susan is here as well, and he's been a great friend to the roundtable. I just learned tonight this is your 3rd time presenting here, so thank you. Thanks for coming down. And I did confirm he's known for his penchant for dapper naval-themed neckties. I did confirm tonight he does have a naval-themed necktie on, so get a look at it before the night is over. So with that being said, we'll just move on, and I'll let you come on. I'll switch over with microphones for you.
I'll put them both up here together.
There. The center one moves it.
Okay. Let's see if that does it. Well, we don't have a movement here. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, Chris mentioned earlier that this is a book. My talk is going to be about the letters, and I'm not going to talk as much about the letters as I'm going to talk about Henry Wales. He did write more than 200 letters to his family during the war, and he wrote a similar amount of letters to other relatives and acquaintances, and but I don't know where any of those are. Never found any. In fact, his cousin was Louisa May Alcott, and he wrote her letters, which he mentions in his letters. That's what his writing looked like. You can see when he runs out of paper, he writes sideways. He turns the letter sideways, and that can kind of get interesting to try to translate. Well, Henry Wales was like hundreds of other men that had merchant marine experience and joined the Union Navy. His years of nautical experience qualified him to join the service as a junior officer. He was thus in the part of the ship's hierarchy where he was able to witness some events, consequences, temperaments, and relationships of the senior officers above him and all the seamen below him. He had no serious love interest, and his family served as his outlet to fully express his wartime observations and sentiments. And his correspondence home fully presents his personality and his thoughts, along with his other observations. He did have a close and loving family. He was born on the 4th of July, 1841. And this was his father. He was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At the time he was born, they were struggling times for the family. His father was Thomas Goodwin Wales, the son of a country doctor. And he married Elizabeth Sewell Willis in 1838. In 1848, after several failed printing and publishing ventures, Thomas left for California. But he didn't go there to make a fortune in the gold fields. And a gold seeker, he did it as a banker. With the help of his brother-in-law, Hamilton Willis, which was his wife's brother, and he was with the banking firm of Willis and Company out of Boston. He and Thomas and some associates gained the capital, and they went to the gold fields. And they arrived in San Francisco in 1849. They were able to prosper because they could charge high interest rates during the gold rush. And after 6 months, he had made a fortune. But for him, this venture was dissolved after 6 months. So he went back to his brother-in-law, and who put up the capital for a new bank. And he, again, made more money. But on the 4th of May, 1841, just under 2 years after arriving, there was a catastrophic fire that burned his bank and nearly cost him his life. He was frightfully burned, and it was 4 months before he could even hold a pen again. With his health shattered, he closed the business and returned to the East Coast. And he lived for 25 more years, and he continually suffered from his injuries. But no one from in his family ever mentioned to him the word California. Well, the misfortune of the father kind of affected the whole family. And you can tell that in the letters that Henry writes home. It changed the dynamics. Henry's father's absence in San Francisco and his disability when he returned created a situation where Henry was emotionally detached from his father. In fact, during the war, he writes only letters that talk about financial things, and sometimes he asks him an opinion about the war. Elizabeth, his mother, was his tower of strength, and that of the family. Now, Henry's schooling was good compared to most people, and because by the time he was able to go off to school, they did have some money. He attended a school in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire, which was just across the Massachusetts border. Now, the Wells family lived in Walpole, Massachusetts, while Thomas worked in San Francisco, but at the outbreak of the war, they moved to Brookline, Massachusetts, which is up here. This is Brookline up here. Well, in 1846, and this was 3 years before his father even went to California, Henry was 15 years of age, and he demonstrated his adventurous nature and signed on for a West Coast voyage on the Ocean Telegraph on her first cruise. This ship was built on the Mystic River, a few miles from Boston, and the vessel belonged to a local firm in Boston, and his father likely obtained the position for Henry. During this trip, Henry kept a journal. In it, he revealed his inquiring nature and character and his desires to learn about the sea. The Ocean Telegraph sailed out of New York and arrived in San Francisco 3 months and 1 day later. He returned to the East Coast, and the sea was now in his blood, and he found employment on other merchant ships. The Martha Rideout, the bark Falcon, and the ship Aurora. And the last ship he served on till the outbreak of the war. Between the two voyages, he also had formal training in a nautical college in Boston, and he studied dead reckoning and navigation. Well, his experience on board ship naturally inclined Henry to join the Navy shortly after the war began. In April 1861, the Navy Department was given the task of blockading 3,500 miles of coastline containing 189 inlets, harbors, and rivers. The Navy would find also one of its main functions was the protection of Army forces and their forward logistical bases and the projection of power. Upon joining the Navy, Henry was placed in a situation that he would find to be professionally confining and often degrading. They assigned him as a volunteer in a volunteer status. The Navy created this group because there was an inadequate number of regular officers available at the war's outbreak. The Navy obtained men like Henry directly from the merchant service and gave them status as volunteers. To do this, they had to pass an examination on seamanship, navigation, and gunnery. Henry began the war as an acting master's mate. Now, master's mates mainly assisted the master in charge of the navigation of the ship, but they also worked and interacted with other officers to carry out the ship's functions. These are the most junior officers on the ship, and in this hierarchical position, as I mentioned, they were basically between the officers and the enlisted men, because at the very bottom of the officer corps. So put him in a very interesting position in his observations. master's mates were in position to hone their skills as officers so that they could get advancement. He did work with great energy for promotion his whole time. And eventually he did accomplish his goal. He didn't get as high in advancement as he had anticipated. The young man, Henry Wells's career was quite varied, even though he spent his entire naval service on vessels that were not warships before the conflict began. He initially served on the Cambridge, and this was attached to the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, responsible for North Carolina and Virginia. It was one of the 4 coastal blockading squadrons, and this was a screw-propelled ex-merchant vessel, and that initially patrolled the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. Commanding officer was William A. Parker. Initially, Henry was very critical of him. After he served on several other ships, however, he looked back at Parker in a much different manner and even wished that he was still serving with him. He wrote his mother in February 1863, "I wish I was back on the old Cambridge again. I did not know when I was well off when I was on board of her. There are better vessels, but I know that there are also some 1,000 times worse." The duties of the Cambridge in the Chesapeake Bay were varied. They operated against Confederate forces in the river. They spent a lot of time off the Rappahannock River, destroying small boats, small vessels in the upper reaches of the river. They protected Army movements, and they continually received escaped slaves, sometimes as many as 40 a day. In November 1861, the Cambridge shelled Urbana, Virginia. It was thought to be harboring Confederate forces, and I thought I had a map up here that showed all these places. I must have grabbed the wrong one, but this is Urbana here, and that's the Rappahannock River. Anyway, after shelling it, Henry was looking at the town, and he called this the sad effects of the war. Writing his mother, he said, "Out of more than 50 houses, I should think that not one was inhabited. They were all burnt or sacked. Some had their sides stove in as if by shot, and others nothing is left but blackened chimneys. And those that still stand had their windows all broken and doors stove in and were more or less dilapidated." In March 1862, Henry was the witness to the Battle of Hampton Roads, at least the first day. During the first day, the Cambridge helped tow the frigate St. Lawrence. She had run aground, and she helped try to get her into a place where she could participate in the battle. She did not. But this same day, the captain of the Cambridge received orders to go to Beaufort. And the reason they were sent there is because the Nashville was there, the commerce raider Nashville. The Nashville had run into Beaufort in late February, and the Navy Department was trying to keep her there. The Union vessels, however, were not able to do this, and she escaped in April 1862. The Cambridge, after that, was sent to Wilmington, North Carolina, to blockade. For Henry, this was sometimes exciting, but mostly it was dull. He still wanted to be in a ship that was actively engaging the Confederates. And off Wilmington, Henry at times became more disillusioned and unhappy with his position on the ship. Now, because they were stationed off Wilmington, they did come to Beaufort a lot. This was the logistical point for the squadron, the logistical base. They regularly had to come here for coal and other supplies. And for Henry, since he was an officer, even though he was a junior officer, he had a chance to go ashore. And he had some real interesting observations. That's supposed to be a picture of a drawing of the waterfront. I've talked to some other people that know Beaufort during the war, and they said it didn't look like that at all. In a letter to his mother in October 1862, he says, "I went on shore in Beaufort this last time. I will never be guilty of doing such a thing again. It is the most miserable place I ever was in. There are only one or two sidewalks in the place, and even those, the sand is almost as dark as in the street. If you wear shoes, you may expect to have them full before you take 3 steps from the boat. The ladies there will not look at a Yankee officer, but always turn their heads away when one passes. When troops first went, when our troops first went, they used to spit at them, but they have got over that pretty much now. I thought I would take a walk through the graveyard, but the pigs soon drove me out. They pastured them there. The graves are all bricked over to keep the swine from rooting up the bodies. Now I'm thinking that they put the bricks over the graves to keep them from washing away when it may have been high water during a hurricane. That's just my guess. We also had other views of Southerners, and I'll share some of those later on too. But in the same letter, he says this: "They are the laziest set of people I ever met with. I do not know what they will do if their slaves are ever taken away from them. They certainly are not fit to take care of themselves. Perhaps the government will take the matter in hand and make some appropriation for the poor ex-masters." Now, another guy that was on the Cambridge at this time was William Cushing. Now, y'all probably know a little bit about William. Most people in the Wilmington area are familiar with him because of the different forays he made into the Cape Fear River during the Civil War. Of course, his adventures here earned him the nickname Lincoln's Commando. But and initially, Henry and William Cushing got along very well. Henry comments regularly on Cushing and his disagreements in the junior officers' mess, because all the junior officers ate together, and Cushing seemed to be a constant irritation to most of the men in the group. There were arguments and differences that caused the mess to splinter into smaller groups, all caused by Cushing. He just didn't seem to be able to get along with anybody that was his rank or below. In letters home that Henry sent home at the end of October 1862, he said all was well. You know, I think they even went oystering one time together. But by late December, there were cracks in the relationship, and by mid-January, it just erupted into war on the ship. There were 2 messes, and then they became 3. And now at this time, Cushing was also an acting master's mate. At once he had been a midshipman. Of course, he was dismissed from the academy, from the Naval Academy. Writing to his mother in 1862, Henry says, "Our famous midshipman is trying dreadful hard to get his head broke, and I should not wonder if he succeeded after a while. He knows that a man of war rules protect him, and he takes a mean advantage of it to cast slurs on some of the others down here. Human nature will not stand everything, and the first thing he knows, he won't know anything, as the saying is. One of the officers made a complaint against him to the first lieutenant the other day, but Mr. Miller said he would not mind him. He was a miserable thing and not worth paying any attention to. So you see what his superior officers think of him. You need not think from what I have said that he is making his attacks on me, for he don't, and I hope he won't, for I don't think I would put up with any more from him without taking hold of him." While writing his mother in April 1862, he says this: "Midshipman Cushing left the ship, and we were all glad enough to see him go, as he has made trouble enough since he has been here." Well, one of the things that actually made Henry happy, and made all men happy, was, of course, getting items from home. And the mail system and the delivery there was like a lifeline for the sailors and the officers and the sailors. Now, when they were in duty in the Hampton Roads area, they regularly got packages and mail because they were there close by, and passing ships would bring them mail and items, and they were also there near Hampton Roads, which is where all of it went. After this, when they're on the blockade, they only get these when you have ships that are passing south. At the time, they actually had Adams Express. The Adams Express company also sent stuff. And Henry could actually use this to send things home as well. Now, some of the items that he received were, like for food, sardines, jelly, preserves, cakes, crackers. He got newspapers, magazines, books. He always complained about the newspapers, particularly because they were usually at least a month old. He got from home, he got clothing, shirts, ties, pants, underwear, handkerchiefs, gloves, shoes, boots, but also sheets, pillowcases, soaps, and medicines. They sent his parents sent him cigars, pipes, and tobacco, writing paper, and stamps. His family also sent him fishing gear. And one time, and this is when he goes to Florida later, which I'll talk about, they sent him his hunting rifle with its ammunition, priming caps, and powder, all in the same box. Now, some of the things that Henry sent home, he sent home fruit. He would board a vessel and they would have fresh fruit, and he would get some and send it home. He could send it home quickly by Adams Express. He collected seashells for his brother Benny, and he constantly sent home money for his parents, and they continually asked him not to do this. On all ships, or most ships during the war, they had musical instruments and they formed bands on board the ships. They usually had groups of men that performed, and for the whole crew and just for parts of the crew. The men and the officers also sat around, sang, they fished, they hunted, they played card games, cribbage. But Henry was lucky because he was an officer. He got ashore at times, and he was able to ride horses. He also was able to get small vessels and sail around the bay sometimes. Henry does mention in the junior officers' quarters of them skylarking, which means just fooling around, and usually it was done in a very aggressive manner. And of course, it's also only done by usually the junior officers. Well, Henry found most of the duty on the blockade very boring. But on the 8 o'clock on the morning of 17 November 1862, lookouts on the Cambridge spotted a schooner near Masonboro Inlet. That's about 12 miles northeast of Fort Fisher. Captain Parker immediately ordered the ship underway toward the vessel, and as it approached the prey, Parker ordered a gun fired. The gunfire prompted the master of the schooner to run her ashore. Parker ordered a boat under the command of acting master William H. Mays. Now, Mays was Henry's closest friend. He asked him to go board the schooner and burn it. Well, Mays was also ordered not to risk getting too close if he believed the surf was bad. Well, the schooner was the J.W. Pindar, loaded with salt. And Mays and his men managed to set fire to the vessel, but as they came back, the surf overturned their boat. And so they lost the boat, and they had to swim back to shore. Well, they observed this from the Cambridge, and Parker sent 2 other boats, each commanded by an acting master's mate. Henry Wells was one, and the other was another one of his good friends, acting master's mate Walter C. Odiorn. They were not able to get the boats through the surf, so Henry swam a line to shore. As they tried to pull the boat off, though, the line parted. Well, then Mr. Odiorn followed with another line, but as he reached the shore, armed Confederates came up and captured the whole naval party, 3 acting master's mates and 10 men. Well, on the 18th of November, the Confederate captors took Henry and the other prisoners to Camp Heath, which was just north of Wilmington. The next day, they sent them to Wilmington under guard, and here, Brigadier General William Henry Chase Whiting, who commanded the district of the Cape Fear, questioned them personally. On the 20th, the Confederates placed all the captives on rail cars for a trip to Richmond, and they reached Weldon, North Carolina that evening. Here they separated the officers from the men, and the officers stayed at a hotel during the night. On the 21st, they resumed their trip, arriving in Petersburg, Virginia, that afternoon. Here they were placed in the county jail, and Mays, who kept a journal, and that's why I know so much about this, because he kept a journal and it still exists. Uh, he he called it was unimaginable. This jail. He said it was the most filthy place that he could imagine. The next morning, the guards moved them once again on trains to Richmond, and they arrived there right before noon. And they transported them to Libby Prison. Fortunately for Henry and the other men, they didn't stay for about 3 hours. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, they paroled all three of them and promised they would go north on the next prisoner of war boat. Well, Henry was ashore for a bit. He was on shore, unattached, and was able to go back to Boston until February 1863 when he came back to Hampton Roads. Well, his next service was on the USS Ceres. He was given orders to go to the Ceres on the 20th of February 1863. The Ceres was a 150-ton sidewheel steamer built in 1856 and purchased by the Navy in September 1861. She mounted two 30-pound and two 24-pound guns. The commanding officer was acting volunteer Lieutenant John McDermott. The vessel seemed to be a wretched vessel. Henry claimed that some of the officers resigned their commissions rather than taking the trip south to North Carolina. Henry called it a cockle shell, which is a nautical nickname for a light boat. The Ceres did encounter a gale on her way south, and it was nearly lost. With a bad boiler and engines that were about to break down at any moment, they reached Oregon Inlet. And the sea was so high at the time that they made it to the inlet that the waves were breaking across the whole inlet, and they did not know where the channel was located. Well, the draft of the bar on Oregon Inlet at low tide is 6 feet, and that's at its deepest point in one place. The draft of the Ceres is just a little over 6 feet, so luckily they had some water over the bar. Henry says that the helmsman aimed for the middle of the breakers, and they made it. And he wrote his mother, "For about 10 minutes, I don't think I breathed, for if we touched the bottom or the man at the wheel made the least mistake, that would have been the last of the Ceres and all on board." Now, the main duty of the Ceres and other small boats, gunboats stationed in the Sounds of North Carolina, was protect the Army positions. And the Army had captured a lot of the places here. You have Beaufort and Washington and New Bern. But they only held those port towns and some of the land after, some of the territory outside of that. And just as the Cambridge had done, the Ceres also ranged up the rivers to destroy small boats that they could find, because the Confederates were using these at night to run supplies both north and south. In fact, the Union efforts to do this were so successful that the Confederates gave up trying to pull them out of sight during the day. Instead, they sank them, and at night they raised them and put them back in use. At the beginning of 1863, while Henry was doing duty in the Sounds, Robert E. Lee decided to probe the areas and sent Daniel Harvey Hill to attack New Bern and Washington, North Carolina. Hill began his attack against New Bern on the 13th of March, 1863, but here the Union gunboats and the Union fortifications successfully stopped the attack. 2 weeks later, on the 30th of March, Hill began an investment of Washington, North Carolina. Confederates established batteries and obstructions along the Tar River to slow down or stop any Union reinforcements. They posted a brigade south of Washington to deal with any relief efforts. Well, at one point, the Union force, the Union leadership sent two efforts. They made 2 efforts to relieve the garrison and they did not get there. On the 4th of April, the series ran the blockade to bring ammunition and extra firepower to the garrison at Washington. In this position, they sent Henry ashore to command a naval battery on the extreme left of the lines facing the river. Now, this is a sketch he made during the war, and this sketch actually is in the official records of the Union and the Confederate navies. It looks a little bit better. They redrew it. But Henry's battery, this is Henry's battery right here. Anyway, he worked on building this for 4 days. He built a parapet 5 feet high with a 6 foot deep and that was 6 feet deep moat with a 10 feet broad ditch. It also had a palisade stakes around it. It had a gate and a drawbridge which allowed entrance to the works. Mounted inside were 2 guns, a 30-pound Parrott rifle and a 12-pounder rifle howitzer. He had 20 men assigned to him in this fort. But when the Confederate forces attacked Washington, Henry was ordered to take his 12-pounder to assist. And see up here, you can see that this is the Confederate batteries up here that are there to attack the town. Well, Henry took his up here to this line to assist. I think I messed up here. That was good. On the 13th of April, the sidewheel transport escort actually managed to run the blockade, not only bringing supplies, but also bringing a Rhode Island regiment. And General Hill ended his siege on the 15th and then withdrew. And the Navy did play an essential part in this. The gunboats protected the bridge that goes across to Washington, and they kept Confederates at bay. Well, overall, Henry's service on the series was not incredibly difficult, and Henry was fortunate as an officer again that he could leave the ship. There were Massachusetts Army units stationed in New Bern, and this was a place that the series frequented. Well, some of the units that were there were from Boston, and he knew a lot of the soldiers there. So he was able to make several visits and spend time with these soldiers and then report back to his family. Well, Henry continued his service on the series and the Sounds of North Carolina until August 1863. This is when he receives an appointment as an acting ensign that same month. And Henry they transfer him to duty off Wilmington once more on the blockade. Well, this time on the blockade, Henry was on the gunboat Montgomery. This was the next merchant steamer that operated before the war between New York and Savannah. This screw-propelled vessel was large and it was fast because it was a packet ship. At 787 tons, it was 201 feet in length and carried a crew of 143. She was armed with 6 heavy guns and could make 11 knots, which was capable of catching most of the blockade runners. Now, the Montgomery did participate on the blockade on both sides of the shoals there, off of New Inlet and off of Old Inlet. Interestingly, his commanding officer was acting volunteer Lieutenant Edward H. Falcone. This is the same Falcone mentioned in Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast. Henry originally did not like him. Writing to his sister Eliza, he said, "Our Captain E.A. Falcone is about the meanest man. At all events, he is not fit to be a gunboat captain." Yet, in the 2 years before the mast, Dana pictures Falcone as an educated captain who he wrote was a sailor every inch of him. Well, Henry, I guess, had remembered it to some degree, and he wrote home that he wanted them to send him the book because he wanted to find out for himself. Well, one of the other things that bothers Henry during this time, he was just promoted, but he still felt like he could rise further in the ranks. And he kept dealing with the issue of he was kind of a second-class citizen in the ship because he was a volunteer officer. He had vastly more skills and proficiency than some of the other officers that were coming on board, and he was highly capable in many areas. And he kept seeing men coming on board that had little or no sea time, but yet they were senior to him. And so he frequently talks about this to his parents, and eventually he actually gets his uncle and his father involved, which I may talk a little bit about later. In a letter to Eliza, his sister Eliza, in April 1863, after his service ashore in Washington, he says he was, he's just anxious for advancement. And he says, well, if I don't get my appointment now between Captain Parker and Captain MacD, I shall be very much tempted to throw my master's mate appointment into the fire and leave the service in disgust. I've been disappointed now so often that I have not much faith in getting it, though. Well, these efforts would continue, and like I say, his father and his uncle had, they had political connections. They both knew the governor of Massachusetts, and they actually went to the governor. They wrote a letter to the governor to see if they could get him to help. Of course, they didn't. The governor did not help. And I'm not sure if it's he even had the influence to change the situation. Well, Henry was also restless in other ways. Monotony was one thing that affected both officers and seamen. And he wrote his mother in June 1864, "It makes our life here seem doubly monotonous and irksome to read of the stirring times elsewhere. I've got all the goodwill in the world to serve my country, but confound it, I have never had a fair chance yet except at Little Washington, and that did not amount to much. Perhaps I might not ought to complain, though, for some have fared worse than I have. There's not an officer on board that has seen as much service as I have." Well, another thing that Henry writes about almost frequently, not too frequently, but every now and then, is racial issues. And as part of that's because they have lots of African Americans coming on board escaping slavery. And his views on race were not any different than most of the Union soldiers and sailors. In May 1864, he wrote a letter to his mother. "I think slavery is a sin, and I would never countenance it in any way, shape, or manner. It has always been a curse to this country, and now that we are at war, I never want to see any peace made without it distinctly understood that slavery shall cease to exist throughout the United States. Therefore, I believe I am fighting for the Union and of the extinction of slavery. What has become of all the darkies after the war is over is more than I can tell, and I leave it to wiser heads than mine to decide. I do not think that gives us any right to buy and sell them." Now, it's clear in his interactions with blacks as they came on the ship that he didn't think they were equal, and he treated them paternally. And while today we have a much greater understanding, in the middle of the 19th century, this is how most whites thought. And from Henry's letters that he's receiving from a lot of his northern friends, they had a much more xenophobic view of race than he did. Well, another thing that Henry deals with during his different cruises is illnesses. He had medical issues at sea. He had headaches and lung issues. And he did smoke, which probably contributed to the latter. He also had what he called bouts of weaknesses, and it might have been caused by a lack of appetite caused by indigestion. For headaches, he used cigars to cure himself. When he had a toothache, he took laudanum, which was an opium-based painkiller, which in the day, they used it for sleep and colds and other maladies, and both children and adults took it. Well, later, he was diagnosed with remittent bilious fever. And this, what they called it in the 19th century, is most often referred to as a relapsing fever with nausea and vomiting, and could be symptomatic of any number of medical issues. In November 1863, after getting a medical survey on board, Henry was ordered to the Norfolk Hospital with the lung issues. Well, Henry stays ashore about 3 months. And this time he's able to go back to the Boston area. And this time, when he gets back in the Navy, they send him to the East Gulf Blockading Squadron, which basically blockaded almost the entire coast of Florida. He goes from what's now Cape Canaveral almost all the way to the state line. He was sent to the Gem of the Sea. And I'll put that up there. Which was a bark rig, 371-ton merchant ship built in 1853. The Navy acquired her in August 1861 and armed her with 4 32-pounders and a 20-pounder rifle. Henry spent his first months in Charlotte Harbor, which is right here. And he seemed to be somewhat content on this station. In September 1864, he was given command of the Rosalie. And that's a vessel that's similar to the Rosalie. She was only a 28-ton sloop that was captured off of Charleston, South Carolina in March 1863. And the Navy acquired her in May. And they used her as a tender to supply the local other blockading vessels and also to carry communications. She carried only a single 12-pound gun. Well, all sailors during the war, no matter where they were stationed, complained of mosquitoes. Well, in Florida, it must have been really a whole lot worse, because Henry talks about them continually on this when he's down in Florida. He wrote Eliza, his sister, from Charlotte's Harbor. The mosquitoes are a terrible plague. If one sits down to write, he hardly gets his pen in his hand when he feels it, the wish of his being first to slap one side of his face and then the other, then his writing hand, thereby, in all human probability, blotting his paper or driving his pen through it. Then his foot. Clothes are no protection to such birds as these we have here. They will bite through a piece of sole leather as easy as sing a serenade. Well, another thing that he commented on throughout his naval service to his parents and sisters were his accommodations. On the Cambridge, he said, and this is all when he was off North Carolina, he said the steerage was like an oven. And he said the thermometer ranged from 90 to 100 in the daytime, and at night it never got below 88. He also complained about the small accommodations, the poor accommodations. They had to share rooms that were not meant to be shared. This happened on the Montgomery and the Gem of the Sea as well. So, they always put the junior officers all together, and it just kind of bothered him a little bit. Well, while stationed in Florida, Henry did make friends with a Union Army officer and his family, because he was going from different parts of the coast, and they had Army officers ashore. In this particular family, he visited their house and had meals with them, and he stayed with them while the family entertained. One of the men's daughters played the guitar, while another daughter had married an ensign from the Gem of the Sea. Well, Henry's main duty while there in Florida was to transfer refugees out of dangerous areas and move them to safety. These missions allowed him to see and meet a lot of the locals. He mainly performed these missions in the tender Rosalie. This is one of his later ships, but he usually carried about 20 people at a time. They traveled to Fort Myers. Let me go back. Oops. They would travel to Fort Myers, which is right here. Go from Charlotte's Harbor to Fort Myers and back. And the Fort Myers was kind of a protected area. because there were refugee camps there, and they were constantly attacked by the Confederates. Henry described Fort Myers as a series of 4 blockhouses with a light breastwork connecting them, enclosing a settlement that only contained a dozen or so houses and horse stables. But there were about 300 men, women, and children living there, as well as 170 soldiers. Well, carrying these people back and forth, Henry met a lot, and he talks about them in his letter, and he had a particularly interesting view of Southern women and men. He said, these crackers, as they call the people who live here outside of the towns, are the most lazy, ignorant, miserable, good for nothing, et cetera, and on and on. He liked the word use that. I guess he could have gone on and on. Specimens of humanity that I've ever come across. The women are bad enough, and most of them smoke and swear as well as their husbands, but they do all the work, both in the house, that don't amount to much. A good New England farmer would not let his cattle live in as a dirty stall as they do, and out. The question as to who is the best woman here is the one that can hunt cattle best from horseback through the woods and till the most land. The men are too lazy to do anything but hunt and drink whiskey. Well, on the 16th of December, Henry was given command of the Annie. The Annie was a 27-ton schooner built in the north and named Nora. The Navy captured her off of Charleston while she tried to run the blockade under the name of La Criolla, which means the Creole. The Navy acquired her in the prize court, and she was 46 feet long and had a beam of 14 feet, draft of 5, and carried a single 12-pound gun. This small vessel served as a tender to the bark Restless. The bark was in Key West for repairs, and Henry sailed there, and finding her not ready for service, sailed back to Charlotte Harbor. Well, the Annie sailed from Key West on the 29th of December. 1864, and never arrived at her destination. Reports of a sunken schooner off Cape Romano soon got back to the leadership, and they sent a steamer to ascertain what happened and if there were any survivors. They found the wreck of the Annie with her mast just above water, and using grapples, they brought her to the surface, and after a careful examination of the hull, concluded that she suffered a tremendous explosion because the port side fore and aft was blown out, probably because her magazine exploded. They found no remains of the crew and only some clothing and bedding. Initially, they thought some of the crew might have reached shore, but never found any survivors. There was never any definitive cause for the loss, so they never found Henry or any of the other crew. Well, the family wanted to remember Henry, but there was no body to bury, so they created a memorial in Forest Hill Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts. This cemetery is the resting place of many other members of the Willis family, including his father, mother, his sisters, with the exception of Eliza, who died in London, and she's buried there, and his younger brother, Benny was his. This memorial reads, Henry Willis Wells, USN, born July 4, 1841, in command of the U.S. schooner Annie. He was lost with all on board off Cape Romaine, Florida, December 31, 1864. Well, unfortunately, there is no Cape Romaine, Florida. There's a Cape Romano. It was Cape Romano. Cape Romaine is in South Carolina. So they got that wrong. But underneath that, there's another inscription, and it reads, and this is from another family member. It reads, William Went, 1877 to 1904, killed by hostile natives in British East Africa. Went was a member of the New England Botanical Club and was thought to have ventured too far in the jungle and was killed by a hostile tribe of natives. Went was Louisa Wells' son. Louisa was his sister, so Henry was his uncle. So that kind of ends the saga of Henry Willis Wells. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Was he at all related to Gideon Wells?
No. Well, Gideon Wells spells his Welles. And at first I thought, well, banker, Wells Fargo, but no, it's not the same. It's not the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because when I first saw these letters, I thought to myself, everybody meets somebody in their life that they immediately like. And Henry was this guy, one of the guys. I liked I just liked him. Yes.
Bob, how did you hear about the letters and the
Well,
writings and so?
well, these letters stayed with the Wells family. They lived in Arlington, Virginia. They lived beside the retired executive director of the Naval Historical Foundation, and they went to him and said, "Well, what should we do with these letters?" And he knew me, and he said, "Would I be interested in looking at them for editing or publishing?" And of course, I did. And they had a son that lived in Chapel Hill, and so they brought him down to Chapel Hill, and I photographed all of them, and then and it just went on from there. But yeah, it was kind of almost serendipity type of situation. But it was, there's so much in these letters that he brings his family, and you can almost understand what all's happening at home because they're asking him questions, he's answering things, and he's answering, since he didn't, none of the letters they sent him survived because they probably went down with the ship. He was a rabid photo collector. He had a photo album on the ship of all the men he served with, or a lot of them, the officers, his family, his friends. They just traded photos, and he had a big photo album. And of course, it was lost in the explosion.
Yeah. You said the magazine blew up.
Yes.
But it wasn't the boiler. What
Well, it's a sailing ship, so they didn't have a boiler.
Oh, it was only a
sailing ship. Yes, it's just somebody mishandled something, or there's no telling what happened. Yes, sir.
You mentioned refugees. Was that something?
No. These would be white people that got caught up in the war, and they're trying to escape to Union lines, and he'd be in Florida. Yeah, he'd be moving them to safer places. Yeah, because basically Florida was it was a backwater of the war. I mean, there was almost nothing happening there. I think they had one major battle at Olustee, was the only battle that anybody remembers in Florida. All right.
As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with this print from one of our members, Jim Horton.
Oh, great.
For coming here and doing this talk for us.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. You
Neat.
bet.
Fort Fisher, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Get a picture of you guys here first.
It's down.
Our acting president. All right, thank you.
Before anybody goes anywhere, we have to have our drawing
Yep.
to see who wins.
Quartermaster. Before I ask you, sir, to do a drawing for us, I would like to put a plug in for the women, for the Wreaths Across America. We have to have it in by November, and it's only $17 a wreath. And the goal is to of course cover the 5,172 graves that we have in here in Wellington. So if you would be so kind as to contribute to that, that would be fantastic. We'd appreciate it very much. For every wreath we sell, we get $5 toward the next wreath. So it's like a bonus. Yeah. And so Mr. Henry has, he can really put a bad name to some Yankees.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a Yankee. I don't talk bad about the South like that. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Well, he was at war with him at the time.
I know, but still. All right. So the first drawing is for our 2 books that are autographed.
What do you want to tell the number?
Yeah, we can probably just do the last 4 numbers. I think they're all from the same box. So 5566. Well, I don't think anybody left us. No, 5566, 635566. There we go. And we're gonna have a few more raffles for somebody to pick what book they'd like. The next one is for, are you more than welcome? Yeah. And then the next raffle is for any book you like. And I can take them all out for you. 635531. Yay! And how about we do one more? Is that all right with everybody? Yeah, let's do two. Two more. Oh, all right, thanks. 635564. Huh, not you, huh? So 635564. All right, and then one last one. Thank you. 635570.